Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on connecting our inventory scene to our data manager, and we moved our inventory data there. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to source code up to this point, as well as a complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to previous videos if you'd like to catch up. So let's get started. So now that we've updated our inventory scene to go ahead and pull our data from our data manager, we now need to actually update it to allow us to use items. And so what we need to do is we need to connect our scene to our monster party scene, and after a player selects an item, we would navigate them to that scene, and then we need to pass that item data along. Then that way, in the monster party scene, we can validate which monster they want to use that item on. So for example, if we want to use a potion on one of our monsters, we'd only allow them to use it on ones that are have partial damage and they weren't knocked out, versus if we had an item that would restore them from the knocked out state, we would only allow them to use that on those monsters that are clearly knocked out. And then later on, if we expand our items, we can have a variety of effects, and then this is where we'll do that safety check to make sure we're only using on monsters that are eligible to. Alright, so go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to update our data that we receive in our monster party scene. So if we jump over to our monster party scene class, what we want to do is we want to enhance our monster party scene data type to include the item as optional, and then that way when we pass it from our inventory scene, we know to pass our item. Versus if we launch our monster party scene from our menu, we wouldn't need to pass this data. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to copy this here, go ahead and paste it, and for our type, this is going to be our item custom type, and we're going to go ahead and make this optional, and we're just going to do item selected. So then what we can do is back in our inventory scene, when we go ahead and in our update method, when we launch our monster party scene, we're going to go ahead and update this to include our new property. And so we'll have item selected. And so then we'll reference our inventory. And then we're going to use our selected item index. And then we'll go ahead and grab our item property from our object. And now that we're passing in our data, we just need to go ahead and update our monster party scene to check to see if we actually want to use an item when we select a monster. So what we need to do is let's come down to our update method. And in our update method, we had a to-do for handling input based on what was used. So let's go ahead and get rid of our to-do. We'll keep our comment. And then so what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to check to see what our previous scene was. And if our previous scene was our inventory scene, then we're also going to check to see if we provided an item data. And so we're just going to do if our scene data previous scene name is equal to our scene keys inventory scene, and our scene data dot item selected. So if it's not undefined, then we're going to go ahead and try to use that item on our monster. And to do this, we're going to make a new method to have all this logic. So we're going to do handle item used, and we'll go ahead and return if that's the case. So then let's come down to the bottom of our class. We'll add in this new method. And so we'll add in our private method. And so what we're going to want to do for our items, we're going to want to check what type of effect that item does, and then go ahead and have logic according to that effect. So as an example, for our potion, we know this has an item effect of heal 30. And so we'll want to check our monster we're trying to use it again to do those safeguards we talked about before. And so what we'll do is we're just going to do a switch statement for the time being. We're going to do this. We'll reference our scene data. We're going to reference our item selected, and we're going to go ahead and grab the effect from that. And then for our case statement, we'll have our item effect, and we'll have heal 30. And we're going to go ahead and call a new method to handle the specific functionality. So we'll do handle heal item used. And then we need to go ahead and pass in how much we want to heal our monster by. And so we'll have an argument of 30. And we'll come back to this method in a second. And so we'll go ahead and break. And then otherwise, we'll have a default statement. And we'll go ahead and use our exhaustive guard. So we'll have this. We'll have our scene data, we'll have items selected, and we'll have effect. And then let's go ahead and copy this. We'll make our new private method, and then we'll use a mount for our parameter. And let's go ahead and add in our type definition real quick. And so amount is going to be a number, and we're just going to go ahead and return a void. So real quick, just going to copy this. We'll put it above here, and we'll get rid of our parameter. So in our handle heal item used method, we're going to need to do a few things like we discussed. So I'm just going to add some comments to our code. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to want to validate that the monster is not fainted. If our monster is not fainted, then we want to go ahead and validate that they're not already fully healed. And then finally, if neither of those are true, we'll go ahead and heal our monster. So we'll do otherwise, heal monster by the amount. And so what we'll go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and start with our case where our monster's already damaged. We want to go ahead and heal them. And so what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and lock our input. So then that way in our monster party scene, we can go ahead and animate our health bar. So then that way we restore our health and we can update our text. And after that's done, we would go ahead and just show a message down here that says, hey, we healed our monster. And then after a set period of time, we could go ahead and go back to our previous scene. And so we'll go ahead and do that logic. The first thing to do is we'll lock our controls. And so we'll do this. We'll reference our protected controls. Let's go ahead and set lock input to true. Then we want to go ahead and update our currently selected monster that we selected and update their HP by the amount we provided. And so we'll do this. We'll do our monsters. We'll reference our selected party monster index. And then we want to grab their current HP, and we're just going to go ahead and add the amount that was provided. And then what we'll do is we're going to add a safety check, so then that way if we go over our max HP, we'll go ahead and reset it back to our max HP. So then what we'll do, we'll just do if, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this here. So if their current HP is now greater than that same monster's max HP, then we just want to go ahead and set their current HP equal to their max HP. So then after we've updated their health, now we actually need to update our game objects to reflect that new state. And so we'll go ahead and first grab our info game text object. So that way we let the player know what we're doing. And we'll do set text. And we're going to do healed monster by. And we're just going to go ahead and grab our amount that we provided. And we'll do HP. So after we update our text, now we need to go ahead and update our health bar. So for that, we need to reference our health bars. So we have our array of health bars that we stored before. And now we'll go ahead and grab our selected party monster index. We grab the right health bar and we'll do set meter percentage animated. And then for this, we just need to reference our monster's current HP and divide that by their max HP. That way we can calculate the right percentage. And then we're going to go ahead and provide a callback. So in our callback, what we want to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and update our text value here for our HP. And so to do that, we need to reference our health bar text game objects. We need to go ahead and use our selected monster party index. Then we'll call our set text method. And then so for our text, we just need to go ahead and set it equal to our current HP. We'll have our space, and then we're going to have our max HP. And then once we do that, we'll need to go ahead and update our monster data in our data manager to reflect that we've healed our monster. And then that way our current state in our game will reflect that. So what we'll do is we'll grab our data manager, we'll grab a reference to our store, and let's go ahead and call set. And we need to go ahead and do our data manager store keys. We'll do monsters and party, and we'll go ahead and pass in our monsters that we have stored in our scene. So finally, after we've updated everything, now we just need to go back to our previous scene, but we don't want to do it immediately. We want to have a little bit of a delay so the player can process what just happened. And so go ahead and do our delay. We'll just do this, we'll do time, and then we're going to use the delayed call method to go ahead and register this callback with phaser. And we'll go ahead and do 300 milliseconds just so there's a small delay. And for our callback here, this is we'll go ahead and go back to our previous scene. All right, so just quickly to recap what we did here is basically in our handle heal item used method, when we want to go ahead and use an item, we're going to go ahead and heal our monster. And so when we do that, we're going to go ahead and select our item. We're going to choose one of our monsters, and we need to go ahead and lock our input so we can wait for everything to finish. And then what we're doing is in our scene, we're updating that scene's reference of our monster's HP value, and then we need to propagate that to our text game objects and to our data manager. And so we'll go ahead and update our text game objects in our scene. We call our data manager to store that new value. Then that way later on, when we come back to our scene, we'll have the right monster data that shows they're healed. All right, so if we want to go ahead and test our changes, let's go ahead and jump over to our data manager. And what we're going to do is in our initial data for our monsters, let's go ahead and update our current HP of our monster to be 15. And then what we'll do is let's come over to our browser. Let's go ahead and go into our developer console. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do local storage, and we're going to call the clear method to go ahead and reset all of our data. So now in our scene, if we go ahead and save and refresh, we should have a new set of data. And if we choose our potion, we'll be taken to our scene and we'll see our monster has 15 HP. So then what we should be able to do is if we hit the cancel button, we should go back, nothing should happen. But if we select our monster and we hit the space key, we can see our text was updated and we can see that their data was updated as well. And so now when we come back to our scene, we see our monster's fully healed. All right, so now that we have that logic working, now we need to go ahead and work on our other use cases. So what we'll do is we'll come back to our monster party scene. And what we want to do is if our monster's already fully healed, we want to go ahead and tell the player like, hey, they're already fully healed. We're not going to go ahead and use the item. And so what we'll do is we'll display that text and we'll need to wait for that player's input until they hit the button. And then we'll go ahead and let them select another monster. And so to go ahead and do that, we're just going to add an if statement. So we'll do if, and we'll go ahead and grab a reference to our current monster's HP. So let's just grab this. We'll put that in our if statement. And if it's equal to our max HP, then we want to go ahead and update our text. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this here, go ahead and paste that, and we're just going to change our text string to be monster is already fully healed. And then we need to go ahead and add a new property for tracking if we're waiting for input. And so we'll do this. We're going to call this waiting for input. We'll set it equal to true. And we'll go ahead and return early if we go into this flow. So then what we'll do is let's come up to the top of our class. We'll go ahead and add in our new properties. We'll have waiting for input. This is going to be a Boolean. So let me just copy one of these types. Go ahead and set this to be a Boolean. And then what we'll do is down in our init method, we'll go ahead and set our initial value. So we'll have waiting for input and we'll do false. So then what we need to do is down in our update method, when we wait for the player to go ahead and press the space key, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to check if our waiting for input is true. And if it is, we'll go ahead and reset our text on our game object here. So as an example, if we go ahead and use our item and we come back and we try to use it again, we'll see we update our text. And then what we need to do is now we need to go ahead and reset that. And so what we'll do is above this, we're just do if, we'll do this, waiting for input. If that's true, we'll go ahead and set it equal to false. We'll go ahead and return. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and update our info container text. And then that way it's going to reset back to saying, hey, choose a monster. All right, and so one other thing we'll want to do is outside of our space key, if we're waiting for input, we don't want to handle our arrow keys. We want to go ahead and just return early. And so we're just going to do this. If we're waiting for input, if that's true, we'll go ahead and return and we won't process the rest of our method here. So now what we should be able to do is in our scene, if we go ahead and use our potion, we'll go ahead and heal our monster again. And then if we come back, we'll say, hey, our monster's fully healed. If we try pressing our arrow keys, nothing happens. But if we go ahead and press the space key, now we can choose another monster and try to heal another one, or go back to our previous scene. All right, so one other thing we need to do when we're checking for our waiting for input is when our back key is pressed, we'll also want to have similar logic here. And so if we're waiting for input and they push the back button, we don't want to immediately jump back to the previous scene. Instead, we want to go ahead and clear our text so then that way we can choose another monster. And so what we'll do is let's just copy this block of code. We'll come down above was back key pressed. We'll go ahead and paste it. And so then that way, if the back key's pressed, we're waiting for input. We'll go ahead and update our text and then we'll go ahead and reset this back to false and we'll return. And then if they press the back key again, then we would go ahead and go back to our previous scene. All right, so for our last case, we just want to check to see if our monster's knocked out. So let's come back down to our method, and we're just going to copy this line of code here. Go ahead and paste that, but instead of checking if we're at our max HP, we're just going to check to see if we're at 0, and then we'll update our text string to be cannot kill fainted monster, and we'll go ahead and lock our input. And then if we want to test this flow, we'll come to our data manager. Let's set our HP to 0. And then what we should be able to do in our scene is if we have our item and we choose our monster, we get our new text. Same thing, our input's locked, and then we can try to select another monster. All right, and then so what we'll do is let's go ahead and reset our HP back up to 15. So now that we have our functionality working for actually healing our monsters, now we need to inform our inventory scene and our data manager that we actually used an item. And then that way we can actually update our scene to reflect that state. So currently in our scene, after we use our potion, we're taken back to our previous scene like we expect, but we still have the same amount of items that we did before. And so we need to go ahead and pass scene data back to our inventory scene so that way when we resume our scene, we know the item was used and they didn't just hit the cancel button to go back. And so go ahead and do that. What we'll do is let's come up to our method for when we go back to our previous scene, and we're going to add a new parameter. And we're just going to call this item used. And real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and add in our param type. And so this is going to be a Boolean. And we're just going to say item used. And so what we'll do is now when we resume our scene, we're going to go ahead and pass in our data that we used our item. And so we'll do item used. And all of our references to this method, we need to go ahead and pass in the right value. So if we are down in our handle heal item used method, we're going to go ahead and set that to true because we did use our item. Versus if we're up in our update method, when we go back because they hit the back key or select the cancel button, we didn't actually use our item, and so we don't want to pass true there. So now we're passing some data back to our inventory scene. We need to actually go ahead and handle that, and then we can update our data accordingly. All right, so now what we need to do is in our inventory scene, we just need to listen for our handle scene resume event, and then we can go ahead and update our inventory. And so what we're going to do real quick is let's come to the top of our class. We're going to add a new type to represent the data we receive when our scene is resumed. So we're just going to copy our inventory scene data type, and we're going to call this inventory scene was resumed data. And so we're just going to receive one property, and this is going to be item used, and it'll be a Boolean. And then what we need to do is now we need to listen for when our scene is resumed. So what we're going to do is let's jump over to our base scene, and we're going to go ahead and copy our method that we have defined here because we're handling this in our parent class, and we need to add this to our child class. And basically what we're going to do is we need to go ahead and override this to go ahead and have additional logic for this class. And so we're just going to paste that down below our update method. And we're going to go ahead and change our data to go ahead and be, instead of any, this is going to be our new type. And so we'll have our inventory scene was resumed data. And instead of doing all this logic here, we're just going to go ahead and reference our super method. And we'll do super handle scene resume. And we'll go ahead and pass in our phaser scene system and our data that we received. So then what we'll do is we're just going to add a safety check to make sure data was provided and item used is set to true. And so we'll do if we don't receive any data or our data item used is false, then we'll go ahead and return early. We won't do anything. If our item was used, now we need to go ahead and update our text game object to modify and have our new value. And we want to go ahead and update our data manager to go ahead and update our inventory. And so what we need to do is we'll do const. We're going to get a reference to our selected item. And so to get a reference to this, we just need to reference our inventory, and we'll still have our selected inventory option index. So this is going to give us our selected item. So then what we can do is on here, we can reference our quantity, and let's do minus equal 1 to go ahead and subtract 1. And then we'll do our selected item, we'll do our game objects, and we'll do our quantity. And we need to go ahead and use the set text method, and we'll go ahead and reference our new quantity. So we're just going to copy this here, and we'll go ahead and paste that. And now after we update our quantity, we need to go ahead and update our data manager. So we'll do data manager, and we're going to go ahead and do update inventory, and we'll do this, and we'll reference our inventory. All right, and so one other thing we'll need to do later is we'll want to add logic so that in that way when we use the last of our item, we can remove it from our list. But for the time being, we're not going to go ahead and do that. We're just going to go ahead and make sure all of our logic's working. And so I'm just going to go ahead and add a to-do. So we'll do to-do, add logic to handle when the last of an item was just used. All right, so one last thing we want to do is, because we have this to do here, we're going to add a safety check in our update method for after our space key was pressed. We're just going to validate that our quantity is greater than 0. And if it is, then we can go ahead and use our item. And so we're just going to do if. We'll go ahead and grab a reference to our inventory. And then we'll go ahead and grab our selected inventory option index. And we'll reference our quantity. And if our quantity is less than 1, we're just going to go ahead and return and not allow the player to do anything. So now what we should be able to do is in our scene, we should be able to test. So if we go ahead and select our potion, we'll select our monster, we come back, we'll see now our text is at 0. And if we try selecting our potion, we can't select it for the time being. All right, so one last thing we're going to do is we're going to make some enhancements to when we leave our inventory scene and we go back to our previous scene. And so currently, when we go back to our previous scene, we're just launching that scene. And what we want to go ahead and do is we'll want to pass some additional metadata to the scene that was resumed to know if an item was used. And so a good use case for this is in our battle scene, once we add in a support for using our items, we'll want to know if an item was actually used in the battle. And then that way, because if we imagine while we're having our battle, for our turn, if we want to use an item, that's going to represent what our monster can do. And we would want to go ahead and skip ahead to the monster's turn. So then that way we don't actually allow the player to use an item and attack. In addition to that, we'd want to know like what was used, and then that way we can go ahead and add metadata to our scene to say, hey, player used a potion, and then it would say, okay, foe is attacking with X. And then likewise in our other scenes, if we ever need to have that metadata, we'll have it available. And so to add that type of functionality, what we'll do is at the top of our class, we're just going to go ahead and add a new type, and we're going to do inventory scene item used data. And for this object, we'll want to know if an item was actually used. So when we go back to our previous scene, this will be true if we use an item, be false if not. And then we want to add an additional property, and this is going to be the item details. And so we're just going to have item, and for this, we're going to make it optional. And so this will go ahead and we'll just do item, and so we have that data. So then what we want to do is down in our go back to previous scene method, we'll want to go ahead and pass that data. And so before we go ahead and resume, let's go ahead and make a new object. And so we'll add in our type real quick. And so we'll have type. And so this will be our item used. This will be our inventory scene item used type. And so we'll do const and we'll do scene data to pass. We'll set equal to our object. And then what we need to do is we'll need to get this data from our method when we call it. And so let's go ahead and add two parameters. We'll do was item used, and we'll do item. And then what we should be able to do is we'll do item used. We'll set equal to was item used, and then we'll have item, and it'll reference our item. So then now when we resume our scene, we'll go ahead and pass in that scene data. And then real quick, I'm gonna go ahead and add our types for this method. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste these. And so we'll have two params. We'll have was item used, we are Boolean, and then our item will be our item. So now we just need to go ahead and update this method to go ahead and expect that data. And so in our update method, similar to before, because we're just going back or selecting the cancel button, this is going to be false. And then what we need to do now is down in our handle scene resume. If our previous scene was our battle scene, we'll want to go ahead and go back to it and not allow the player to use more than one item for their turn. And so to go ahead and do that, we're just going to add a check. We'll do if this scene data dot previous scene name is equal to our scene keys and our battle scene. Then we'll want to go ahead and call our method, go back to previous scene. We want to set this to true, and we'll want to do our selected item, and we'll pass in our item details. All right, so for the time being, we won't be able to test this until we update our battle scene, but we'll have our logic in place so it's ready to go. So to go ahead and test everything end to end, let's go ahead and come back to our preload scene, and we're going to go ahead and update our scene keys. We'll go back to our title scene, and what we'll do is we'll come over to our browser, and we'll go ahead and test our game. And so let's go ahead and do a new game. So real quick, if we go into monsters, we have our monster. It has some damage on it. And if we go into our bag, we have our potion. So what we'll go ahead and do is let's go ahead and use our potion on our monsters. Now they're fully healed. Now we have 0 potions, so we can't select it. If we hit cancel, let's go into our monster scene. We'll see now our monster is fully healed. And if we go ahead and save, let's go ahead and refresh, go to continue. What we should see is in our bag, we still have 0 potions, and for our monster, they're still fully healed. Alright, and just to clean up some data, what we'll do is let's come back to our data manager. We'll go ahead and reset our monster's HP back to 25, and then let's come back to our inventory scene, and up in our init method, we'll go ahead and clean up our code for our inventory. Alright, and with that actually brings it into this video, and that wraps up our inventory section on our game. So in our next set of videos, we'll start working back on our battle scene again. And we're going to pick right up where we left off with using our items, and we'll enable using our items from our battle scene. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.